Welcome into the latest episode of the 5 Reasons Podcast. I'm Ethan Skolnick here, as always, with Chris Whittingham. Now that you have found us, make sure that you hit the subscribe or follow button on your favorite podcast provider. We're now on more than 12 apps, actually, including Spotify and TuneIn. So check us out there if you prefer to get your podcasts there. Also, check out the other 14 podcasts in our network. New episodes have come out over the past couple of days from Miami Heat Beat, 3 yards per carry, Fish Tank. Their episode with Mark Duper is really worth a listen, particularly after last week with Mark Clayton. Also, check out our 2 new podcasts, Out for the Count, and also the Chamber podcast hosted by Chris Chambers on fitness and performance. Also, thank you. We crossed the 300,000 download threshold, so we appreciate it. That is a good half hour for the Le Batard show, but it was a good 6 months for us. So thank you for getting us there, and we appreciate it. And one of the reasons it took us so long, Chris, we're not going to pin this just on ourselves. One of the reasons it took us so long is because we picked the absolute worst year in South Florida sports history to start a podcast network, and none of the teams have been particularly good. And so what we're going to try to do today is the absolutely impossible. We've brought on Chris Fischer. You can find him on NBC6. You can follow him at Fischer NBC6 and catch him on Sports Final, also on every Sunday night. And we've brought in Chris for a little bit of help. One, because we've had 18 Chris's on the network already, and we want to make it more confusing for you. We just had Christian Hernandez this week on the Heat. It's every day is another Chris. But we want to try to pick the 5 biggest sports stories in South Florida. Now, I did not say best.
Yes.
Because there was no best. So
I have an extensive list, and yet, of the positive ones, there's 4.5, and the half was if you consider potentially trading for someone to be a positive.
Right, yeah. 3 months of pumping the network's numbers by they're going to get Jimmy Butler. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
That was the one there. But Chris, the other Chris Fischer, thank you for joining us for this hopeless exercise.
Absolutely, and just to cut down on the confusion, just call me Fisher. Everybody else does. It makes it easier.
All right, that's all we'll do.
Fair enough.
We go with Witty inside the network. All right, so we're going to count these down from 5 down to 1. We've each spent a lot of time. Whittingham had his spreadsheets to track it. I just went back through our most popular episodes. We're going to go 5 down to 1 in terms of the biggest stories in South Florida this year. We will take turns. I'm going to go to Fisher first here. Okay, your number 5 story in South Florida in 2018.
Unfortunately, it's a downing story where the Florida Panthers, they went on a huge stretch back in February, going 20-9 to close out the year after the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas incident, the shooting there at the school. Just the way that they honored the school and the way they were able to play down the stretch after beginning the season terribly. Looked like they might be able to creep into the playoffs, but eventually they never made it in, finishing 1 point short. I've got them coming in as story number 5, and just the way they were able to play for the South Florida community.
Yeah, and for me, you look at the way that they're playing now. They lost again last night on day of taping to the St. Louis Blues. They're, second from bottom in the Eastern Conference wildcard race. They're doing the same thing again, which is they'll start the season poorly. They'll have a bunch of road games. They'll have games in hand, and then they'll make a second half run, and they'll probably miss the playoffs by 2 or 3 points. That's how every season seems to go for them, and it really is about. Now, obviously, we don't really get to hockey, really until they get close to a playoff chase here in South Florida, but these are the months in which this is being decided. It's October, November, December that the Panthers have been missing the playoffs in recent years, and I think they're going to do it again.
And what you always talk about, you say games in hand. We're always saying games in hand, right? It's like the Dolphins, as we speak, are in the hunt. The Panthers have games in hand. The Heat have their culture, right?
We should rename the Goalie on Ice podcast the Games in Hand podcast.
Games in hand. The Canes are back, right? We heard
That's
that
right,
one.
yeah.
The Canes are back. These are all the favorite phrases.
Why did we think of these when we were naming the podcast? Our Canes podcast should be called "We're Back" or something like that.
We're back, Canes. Yeah, definitely should. I'm going to talk to Goldie later today. Actually, we're changing it to games at hand. It's very frustrating. I was there the other night against the Rangers. And, obviously the crowd was 75% Ranger fans, but that was an entertaining game, but it also showed you this team's flaws again. They have a top line that can play with any top line in the NHL with Barkov and Huberdeau in particular. And obviously Trocheck's out. He was kind of manning the second line. They've added Hoffman. That's worked out better than a lot of other acquisitions. And we actually have an interview with Mike Hoffman. It's going to come up on our feed here this week. But there's not enough depth. They have no protection behind Luongo at this stage. They're counting on him entirely. The defense is so-so. They give up goals at the wrong time. So, yeah, it is frustrating. We'll be having this conversation in March and being like, why did they drop all those games in November and December? So that's a good number 5. Chris, what is your number 5?
Now I'm going to be utterly predictable here and say that it is MLS Miami officially being granted expansion in January, the club being named, and the stadium plan being put to referendum and them winning it. This is a long, dragging-on saga. It's been, I think, we're nearing on the 6-year anniversary of the initial press conference down at the museum park down in Miami, where it was officially announced as Beckham has chosen Miami, and we've gone through a million stadium plans. We've learned in the last year that if not for Jorge Mas coming in at the last minute, that this was going to die. And so the fact that we went from death to officially having, a team and colors and a stadium plan that looks like it's going to go ahead, I would say that that's pretty significant towards the long-term sports landscape of this market, because I think Miami without soccer doesn't really make sense. America not having a team in Miami and soccer doesn't really make sense. So the fact that they were finally able to get that over the line is my 5th biggest sports story.
I'm surprised that's number 5 for you, Whittingham. I figured that would have been your number 1.
1 through 5. What 1 through 5, Fisher?
What you guys don't know is 4 is going to be the same, and 3 is going to be the same, and 2 is going to be the same, and 1 is going to be the same.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was expecting. I actually almost put that 5. I was going to put it 5 along with Derek Jeter in this context, which is that Beckham and Jeter together seem both totally committed to this market, and that is something we were sort of waiting to see. I know not everybody likes what Jeter is doing, but he's here. He's been present. He's been much more available than, say, other executives have come to town. I mean, where Bill Parcells just took off for the track every day. Jeter has been, he's been in the community, and he seems to want to make this thing work. So I was going to put Beckham and Jeter together. But for number 5, I'm going to go with one positive story related to the Dolphins. I know this is going to shock Whittingham, but we had a conversation before the season about would they find any stars, right? Like, this was a totally starless team. They had one guy on the top 100 for NFL Network, and that was Cameron Wake at age 35 or 36 in the 70s. I think they found 2 stars this year, and that's more than I was anticipating, which is I think they have a legitimate star in Xavier Howard. We'll see if he plays the rest of the season. And they have to me, a surefire star going forward in Minkah Fitzpatrick. And for a team that has struggled so much to find quality, even at the top of the draft, to have those 2 guys that they've drafted now in the 1st and 2nd round in recent years, and you throw Tunsil in, who I think has had a really good season. I think for the first time in a while, we're like, there's some actual young players on this Dolphins team that we like that are going to be here for a while. And one of the reasons that this came to mind for me is our Fish Tank podcast. And I was thinking about this the other day. Like, when Seth Levitt is still doing that podcast for us in 15 years with OJ McDuffie, who are they going to draw from the last 10 years, right? I mean, Carlos Dansby, Brandon Marshall, like, who's coming? Brian Hartline, like, who's coming back? I feel like they finally have some real stars building there, and that is a positive. And I just wanted to stun everybody by giving you a Dolphins positive. So that's number 5. Let's go to Fisher for number 4.
Well, let's go back to week 6 with your Finns. The overtime thriller beating the Bears, 31-28. Kenyon Drake fumbles at the goal line. Bears miss the field goal, and Jason Sanders knocks through the 42-yarder to shock everybody. Over 1,000 yards of offense in that game. It's an incredible game. They're talking about it nationally. I mean, I think it kind of let everybody know, hey, Dolphins do stand a puncher's chance to make the playoffs.
Yeah, and to me, the oddest thing about it, I really think historians are going to look back at this Bears season. Now, it'll depend on them, like, making a Super Bowl run. But, like, if they go all the way, if they, like, knock off the Saints in round 2 and the Rams in round 3 and get to the championship, and everyone's going to be, it's one of the greatest defenses, and it's incredible that this amazing defense in this offensively driven era was able to get all the way to the Super Bowl or the NFC Championship game, and then they're going to look through their schedule and go, hang on a second. You give 550 yards to Brock Osweiler? The hell? The hell happened there? Like it is the ultimate oddity in the context of this season that the greatest defense in the NFL this season, by some margin, there isn't really competition for that title for the Bears. That the Dolphins did that. Like, and as we've chronicled on this podcast, in the context of Dolphins history, a historically struggling offense, an offense that at times looked incompetent over the course of the year. They scored 31 points and won against the Bears with 550 yards with their backup quarterback that is the nationally derided backup quarterback in the NFL. It makes no sense. I didn't have that on my list, but I think that's a really good shout.
Go back to 86 with the Bears when they lost only one game on the way to the Super Bowl. They had a vaunted defense at that time. Yeah, it was Dan Marino getting it done. But he didn't throw up 380 yards like Brock Osweiler. I mean, that is an anomaly, to say the least. That was his first start for the Dolphins. It was an incredible game. And I think, like it was in 86, maybe the South Florida factor played into it, and we saw that this past weekend against the Patriots.
Yeah, I've seen Marino, and he's no Osweiler. I mean, it's not even.
I learned this year they went like a year and a half without taking a sack. So yeah, I'm gonna go say he's not Osweiler.
I think people who did not. I mean, if you saw how old are you, Fisher?
I'm 38.
So the 84 season, you were 4. Then, right? Roughly? Yeah, something like that.
Yep.
Okay, I was old already. I was 11. And that season, Dan Marino looked like the greatest athlete in the history of Earth. It was unbelievable. I mean, it was comparable.
It had to have been
Florida's best season.
It had to have been like from going from black and white to color, right? Like just like the difference in which the NFL offense is being played with this quarterback compared to the way it had been for the previous 15, 16 years. Like it had to have been revolutionary.
Well, how would you have liked to have been a kid on Long Island who made the argument that the Jets made the better pick by taking Ken O'Brien?
Oh, God.
Oh no!
I still have that number 7 jersey somewhere up there. I don't know what Kenny's doing these days, but I made that argument. But that's a good one, Fisher. That's off the board. I would not have necessarily gone with that one. I'm going to go number 4, and I know you guys are probably going to have this higher. I'm going to go with the Shock at the Rock number 4.
I have the Shock at the Rock 4 too.
Okay, because I have 3 that I think are bigger picture stories. Sure. I mean, this was kind of, look, this was an amazing moment. I think in a lot of ways it does change the framework of the organization because I think Adam Gase was under a lot of, in my view, very rightful heat previous to this, and now having one incredibly well-designed play in a game that you were very competitive against the Patriots and scored points, which is something that the Dolphins had not been doing. I think you put all of that together, and then you have something that was executed absolutely perfectly at home against the team that's tortured you for 18, 19 years, that was going to win the division on your field. It's a tremendous thing. Now, at the same time, I put a poll up on 5 Reasons Sports yesterday. I said, if you can only have one, which would you take? The Shock at the Rock play, the Ray Allen shot, and the Renteria hit. Okay, and to me, Shock at the Rock is 3rd because it doesn't have the consequences of the other 2. I mean, and to me, Renteria is 1st. Most people would not agree with that. They're going to say Ray Allen.
It's a walk-off Game 7, man. Like
right.
Ray Allen didn't walk off with the championship. He kept it alive, and they still had to win the rest of the overtime and the next game.
But nobody ever remembers Game 7s when you have a great Game 6, right? That is like the 86 Mets. Everybody remembers Game 6, right? Buckner, Mookie, etc. Nobody remembers Ray Knight's home run in Game 7. Like nobody remembers what happened in that game. Okay, Game 7. And in that situation, you go back to Carlton Fisk's home run in Game 6. Okay, Red Sox 75. Nobody remembers what happened in Game 7. There's this history in sports of these incredible Game 6s, and then these Game 7s that total afterthoughts. So to me, it's Renteria's hit would be 1st because, again, that was a first World Series for that team that had only been in existence for 5 years, and it was a great, great World Series. I mean, it was every bit the World Series that the NBA Finals were in 2013. So anyway, I'm going to put the Shock at the Rock 4th. That's where
I will say the argument for having a bit more staying power is that, number one, it does kind of cap off this narrative of the Patriots in Miami. And Alfredo pointed this out on his podcast on 3 Yards Per Carry this week, that Tom Brady is going to go the entirety of his career under 500 at Hard Rock Stadium, and that's like going to be like the one. Again, we're going to look back in 20 years and go, wait, what? How is it possible? But the other thing too is it will be a clip that will live on forever. It will be when they do clip shows in 20 years, when we don't have televisions and it's all on YouTube. If they do great greatest endings to games, to NFL games, to sporting events, period. I think that touchdown is going to live on forever. So it does have a staying power, a lasting power that maybe some of these other stories, as much as they have sort of shorter term lasting power, I think in the end, I think that clip is going to be played so often that I feel like it will kind of live on forever in some ways.
Let me ask you guys this. Is it more shocking to you that that play developed, or the fact that the Patriots knew it was coming? Because when you talk to them in the locker room afterward, they knew that play was coming. They knew a lateral was coming, and it wasn't going to be a Hail Mary.
That's a tough question.
And yet Gronk was out there. Why is Gronk out there?
I don't know. I'll tell you what, Simon Clancy, I don't know if you guys listen to 3 yards per carry this week, but our Simon Clancy just went off on Belichick for about 3 minutes on that one. Like, there's no justification for Gronk being out there unless you think Tannehill's going to reach the end zone with the throw, which as he said, there are only a couple quarterbacks in the NFL, maybe Mahomes, maybe Josh Allen, that would have made that throw. And this is Ryan playing through at what we know is not a good shoulder right now. Like, he's not,
and an even worse ankle probably.
Right. So how is he going to plant and make that throw? What is Gronkowski's purpose out there, especially when you had McCourty sitting over on the sidelines? Like, that made absolutely no sense. It's funny, for a guy who has been absolutely brilliant for 18, 19 years, Belichick, there are some times, man, like, even go back to the 2008 Wildcat game. Like, I mean, he was totally bamboozled in that game. The decision, not to play the corner in the Super Bowl last year, whose name escapes me right now, is in Tennessee, Butler, right? Malcolm Butler. Like, some of the decisions he's made over the years haven't made a ton of sense.
Today's episode of the 5 Reasons Sports Podcast is brought to you by AutoNation. AutoNation makes it easy to customize your new or used ride with a huge selection of AutoNation auto gear accessories. AutoNation is your one-stop shop to get your vehicle auto gear equipped with the top brands. Schedule your auto gear session today at an AutoNation store near you. Design specialists will take you through the entire customization process, step by step, helping you create the vehicle of your dreams, from new wheels to a customized entertainment system. We've got you covered. Qualified buyers right now can take advantage of 0% financing for 60 months. Schedule your session today. Visit AutoNation.com to find the nearest location. Today's edition of the 5 Reasons Podcast is also brought to you by BetDSI. Be sure to use the promo code REASON101 when you check out and start your new account with BetDSI. You can gamble on absolutely anything. I'm starting first with the NFL. My goodness, is the Thursday night game fantastic. Kansas City Chiefs playing host Los Angeles Chargers. Chiefs favored by 3.5 in that one. I have no idea how I'm going to bet. I will say, though, I'm going to wager on that game of football. Miami Dolphins away from home against Minnesota. 7-point underdogs. That's right, that Minnesota Vikings team that struggled until the very end to get a single point against Seattle, or 7-point favorites against the Dolphins. I'm not saying, but I think I kind of like the Dolphins +7 and the Dolphins +258 to win outright. And then college football bowl season is starting. So you know what? There's going to be a game in the middle of the afternoon played between Toledo and FIU. Do you want action on a game that starts at 1:30 in the afternoon? Well, then you got to start your account at BetDSI. Use the promo code REASON101 at checkout.
Let's go to number 3, and I'll start this one. To me, it's the loss of confidence in Mark Richt. I think when you look at the context of the Canes season, they beat FSU and Virginia Tech and nobody cares, because I think that Mark Richt came into this season like with a honeymoon. Unlike a lot of other coaches in this market, he got a new extension. He started 10-0 last year. There was a feeling if he could just find a quarterback or decide on a quarterback that you'd be in position potentially to contend for a national championship. They started the year favorites against LSU, a game that we thought they were going to win so much that we had a watch party for it. Okay, it was a total disaster. And to me, the larger context of the program is that Canes fans, who I think were all in on Mark Richt before the year, now they question the play calling. Now they're stressed about Manny Diaz leaving, okay, which means you're going to have to replace another coordinator and the one who has done the best work for them this season.
About recruiting?
The stress about recruiting has been bad. Check out the new 5 Rings Canes episode we have on our network. Andrew Ivins appeared on there again to try to clarify some of that stuff. But whatever you want to say, it hasn't been good. It hasn't been what it was supposed to be this season. So to me, what always happens in this market is certain coaches have honeymoons, and then there's a point, there's a pivot where the fans turn on them, and it's very hard to get it back. And it's happened with many, many coaches in this market. I remember Sperano's first year. He was a genius, the Wildcat. By the middle of the second year, people were making fun of fist-pumping field goals. Okay, when it happens, it happens. It even happened with Saban in the second season. It happened with Jimmy in the fourth season. It happened with Wannstedt pretty quickly. But with a lot of coaches in this market, that's happened. It's happening with the Panthers coach right now, okay? And I feel like that has happened. If you look at the message boards, if you look at Twitter, I feel like that's happened with Richt, and I feel like there's some regret now about the extension and whether or not he's fit for this century in terms of offense, whether he needs another play caller. So I have that at number 3.
I have to completely agree with you. I think that's a huge storyline. And I was just doing radio up in Tampa the other day. We were talking about the Mark Richt situation and his nephew, Max Johnson, Brad Johnson's son, choosing LSU over him. I mean, even with a family tie, this guy can't pull in recruits. So with Manny Diaz potentially leaving for Temple, we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But I think he should be your head coach. I mean, this is the guy who brought in the turnover chain, who kind of turned the culture back to what it was. There was such an insatiable hunger for Hurricanes fans to get back to winning that they bought all in. They put all their chips in despite losing the final 3 games of the season last year, ready for this year to turn that corner to be a national championship contender. And the absolute letdown that the Ricks, I'm going to put that plurally, the Ricks, John Richt and Mark Richt, have brought to this offense, it's terrible. And the fact that the Canes fans have been able to turn on him so quickly, that's rather surprising how much they were boasting him up before the season even began. I think ultimately down the road here, Mark Richt knows that, his time could be up rather soon because of the fact that the Canes fans are all over him. It showed how much potential they have to go back to winning and sell out Hard Rock Stadium and bring a revenue to the Hurricanes program that I don't think Blake James is going to allow them to lose that revenue that they were showing they have the potential to provide if Mark Richt continues to be the head coach.
Right. I feel like a lot of fans are facing the decision to renew their season tickets. They're looking at next year's schedule and going, I'm certainly one of them, but I do think that you look at, and now we can sort of say that when they were 10-0 and number 2 in the college football playoff rankings, that it was on the back of their defense. And that even when they got, even when they went as far as they did, their offense was okay. Like, it was good enough to sustain the fact that their defense was incredible in creating turnovers at this really high rate. But then you look at this year, that contrast has only grown. They couldn't figure out the quarterback position. And the defense, all the while that their offense goes 4 weeks without scoring more than 20 points, they're holding opponents to 24 and 27, which is more than enough to get the job done in college football. Like, their defense has held up their end of the bargain. Really save for the opener against LSU, they've done their job in every game this year, and the offense has failed them again and again and again. That defense is a 10-2, 11-1 defense, and like you said, if you lose Manny Diaz, for me, he's what makes the program unique at this point, and Mark Richt will be looking around going, well, what am I going to do to save this? Because I don't think I have the quarterback. The offense is coming along really slowly. Am I going to bring in a play caller? Which play caller am I going to bring in? Like, I just think that there's a shortage of ideas right now on offense, that on top of the internal strife within the program, players leaving in the middle of the season, and I think that you look at the coaching situation right now, and the popularity rating for Manny Diaz is far higher than it is for Mark Richt, and it is kind of amazing that all it took was 1 year. It was 1 year to go from 10-0 and in number 2 in the college football playoff rankings, having beaten Notre Dame on national television, featured on College Game Day, to this. And this feels eerily familiar to the last 15 years for Canes fans.
All right, Whittingham, what is your number 3 then?
Mine is the Miami Marlins trading the National League MVP Christian Yelich. That happened in late January, by the way, so it counts for calendar 2018. And for the Marlins to have done this in 2 straight years is insane. It's absolutely crazy that they traded the National League MVP in 2017 to the Yankees, and then they traded the 2018 National League MVP to the Brewers, who then went on a run in the postseason. Like, you now look back and say, I remember at the time, I think it was probably, I want to say 2015, I was still working at 790 at the time, and they sent me out to Marlins Media Day, and Michael Hill was saying, we have the best outfield in baseball. I'm like, what are you on about? Like, you look at their numbers at the time, and I didn't think Christian Yelich was a particularly impressive player. I was more on the Brendan Tobin side of things, where he was basically saying, I'll literally eat crow if he hits more than 20 home runs. Like, that's where I was with him. I didn't think he was a special player. He's a damn National League MVP. Like, it's an absolute a travesty that you've traded the MVPs in 2 consecutive years. Like, they had the core of a championship-winning team. It's going to sound crazy to say about the Marlins. They had the core of a championship-winning team, and look, I was listening to David Sampson on with Lebitard talking about everything that they did in their negotiating process, and well done to David Sampson, because they were selling the team one way or another, and yet he found a way to, without anyone's help, it was him and he said it's his attorney that drove up that asking price to $1.2 billion, but the asking price ended up crippling the franchise. If they sell the franchise for $800 million and someone uses the $400 million difference to invest in the team, I think they could have gone on a playoff run. And I think it is scandalous. And if anyone cared, if anyone still bothered to have emotions about the Marlins after they've been killed for 25 years, it's incredible. They traded the MVP in consecutive years. I think that's absolutely massive, and it doesn't dwindle to me just by virtue of the fact that the Marlins aren't particularly relevant in the market.
Well, and here's the one thing I want to jump in on this, and I'm going to let Fisher jump in, is the difference between Stanton and Yelich was there was a compelling reason to trade Stanton, right? And I think there may be some buyer's remorse in New York now. I mean, the compelling reason was that is just not a sustainable contract for a market like this. And he was also a guy who had holes, okay? For all the home runs, he had holes, okay, where he would go through long droughts. He wasn't necessarily a build-around guy. The problem with the Yelich move is that there was the only compelling reason for that trade was they didn't see him as someone who wanted to be there. Okay. I mean, even Craig Mish on our Swings and Mishes podcast he gave Michael Hill the out to admit that was the reason, because we all know that was the reason, that they did not like Yelich as a clubhouse guy. And that's one of the major reasons they moved him. Now, they did get better prospects back from Yelich than they did for Stanton, or at least it appeared at the time, although Brinson struggled so much. We'll have to see what Monte Harrison is. But that, to me, is the issue with it. With Stanton, I think there's a justification for trading Stanton. Maybe it didn't go as you wanted. Maybe it would have been better if you would have accepted a trade to the Cardinals or the Giants. You could have gotten more than you got from the Yankees. But I know why Jeter and this group had to do that. With Yelich, I don't understand it. And I kind of feel the same way about Real Muto, to be honest. And as we're speaking here, that trade could happen today. But I mean, you got to pick somebody to build around, right? Like, I mean, and they had in those two guys, I mean, Real Muto, they got to give an extension to, but in Yelich, they had that thing locked up. Like, that's the one I just don't get.
Well, if you talk about Yelich and being a home run hitter, he's just not one. I know he was able to display it in Milwaukee, but he's not a big power guy. He's just gap-to-gap guy, and when the ball leaves the yard, he just happens to get a good swing on it. Put together an MVP caliber season, rightly so, but he also has a bunch of guys hitting around him like he did when he was here in Miami. And when you're in that clubhouse 2 years ago with Yelich and Stanton, it was obvious the alpha dog was Stanton, and then the residual effect, it kind of oozed off him onto Yelich, and they carried rather the same attitude, and that's not the type of attitude that they wanted in the clubhouse. It was surprising considering how team-friendly Yelich's contract was that they moved him, but you had to understand with this ownership group coming in, and if you go back and you look at not so much Derek Jeter, but Bruce Sherman's past, this is a man who made his money through selling off newspapers, slashing and burning newspapers, which a lot of now media guys have transitioned out of newspaper, whether it's podcasts or doing the different things on the web that they're doing nowadays, because of guys and tycoons like Bruce Sherman. So you knew he was going to come in and slash and burn the Marlins the same way. I feel like Jeffrey Lurie and David Sampson drew up a plan years ago, maybe 5-6 years ago. It said 2012, not 2012, back in 2012, looked at 2018, 2017, said, look, we're going to make a run at the World Series. I'm going to want to sell the team at the time because I think that's when I'll have the most profitability. We'll have a new stadium. We'll balloon Giancarlo Stanton's contract up, and then we'll make it backloaded so that when I have to sell the team, it's left on somebody else's shoulders to have to deal with Stanton's contract. It's not my problem any longer. I think this is the plan the entire time for these guys. And it's unfortunate because when you go back years down the road, decades down the road, they're going to look back in baseball history and say the Miami Marlins did what? They traded back-to-back MVPs. And don't kid yourself. Marcell Ozuna has a chance to win the MVP next year with St. Louis with Paul Goldschmidt now batting right beside him.
No, that's totally true. And it's also the same organization that they're going to be saying, what? They traded Miguel Cabrera in his prime for Burke Badenhop, Cameron Maben, and Andrew Miller before everybody figured out that Andrew Miller would be a really good reliever. Like that's what they did. It's the history of the organization. But I do think the fact that I didn't even use that one as one of my top five, Chris, I think shows that we're kind of immune to it at this point, to a certain degree. Like that, it didn't even come up for me. Oh yeah, they traded MVP. Okay, they do that every year. Fisher, what's your number three?
D-Wade turns back the clock. Game 2, the NBA playoffs, where right in front of Kevin Hart talking smack to him, buries the big bucket. He had 14 points in the second half. So winning Game 2 of the NBA playoffs, first round there in Philadelphia, was a big win and a big D-Wade moment.
The D-Wade, I think, is going to come up for some of ours as we go forward. Now, let's go now to number 2. Fisher, I'll let you start.
I have the Miami Miracle there, or the Shock at the Rock, the Magic City Miracle, whatever you want to call it, Kenyon Drake in the 69-yard run. I just think for the moment, the instance of 2018, not a lot of positives this year to talk about. That was an incredible moment people will be talking about for years to come. And it's something Dolphins fans could surely use after all the rough years to be able to have an exhilarating moment like that over the Patriots, to beat Tom Brady, as you said, a losing record at Hard Rock Stadium, and just make it more of a house of horrors for the Patriots and Bill Belichick. That's just a huge accomplishment, I think, by the Dolphins.
Yeah, so in terms of Drake, I totally understand that being higher. For me, number 2, I swapped out what you put for number 3, Ethan, and that would be the Hurricanes. I didn't focus it as much as Mark Richt. Obviously, he's the head coach, and so the figurehead will get all the blame for it, but I kind of took it from just the program taking huge steps back, that we felt that in year 1 under Richt, it took a step forward. In year 2, you beat your rival. You get to number 2 in the playoff rankings. You get to a major bowl game. And then I sort of laid out this year that the next step for me was going to be winning a major bowl game. It didn't have to be getting into the playoff. It had to be, get to the Peach Bowl and beat UCF or something like that. Like, it would be sort of that next incremental step for the program. But instead, you've kind of unraveled all the foundation that you were building. You don't have a quarterback. You're losing important players on defense. You might lose your defensive coordinator. Recruiting has gone down when I thought that was going to be the thing that would be stable throughout the entirety of the Rick tenure. And I think that because we're talking about as well adding a practice facility, the stadium, building good environment, like all these things were going in the right direction. Like everything you'd want out of a college football program, them spending money, having a nice stadium, a great atmosphere, a building program, great recruiting, assistants that are doing well, player development, good scheme, like everything you'd want out of a college football program was sort of heading into the right direction. And the fact that it's gone in such the opposite direction in 1 year, it was like a 4-week stretch where you lose to Virginia, you lose to Duke, you lose to all these middling ABC on the road, you get hammered by them, that it was so far in the other direction for me. It's just it's monumental. And you enter next season, they open the year with a neutral site game in Orlando against the University of Florida. And I have zero confidence right now that they can go there and win that game when, again, we're talking about building foundation. Dan Mullen did in a year what Mark Richt did in 2, and you feel like Dan Mullen's going to carry on in that direction, and it's going to be pretty frightening if Florida's going in the right direction at the same time as Miami isn't, because, again, I think Miami, after Muschamp was fired, and after McElwain was fired, and for Florida State, after Jimbo was let go, and where it wasn't let go, he went to Texas A&M, that now Miami had the upper hand on the other 2 big schools in Florida, and that Miami was in the right direction while the other 2 had a pretty significant rebuild job on their hands, and now all that's gone in 1 year. And frankly, it took like 4 weeks for that to happen.
I want to tell you about another great sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, and for this one about PC Reboot, I'm going to speak to personal experience, because I started going to Barrington about 6 months ago because I'm terrible with computers. I get extremely frustrated with them and all of my different devices. I was looking for somebody. I just happened to stumble upon his great reviews online, so I went to check him out over in Pembroke Pines. He's over in East Pines on 8970 Taft Street, and I had a great experience. And so I've been going back ever since. And the reason I had a great experience is not only does he know what he's doing, he's got over 20 years of experience fixing computers. He's a Microsoft certified technician, but he also fixes all types of other products. But he's honest. He told me what the problem was. He told me what it should really cost. And then again this week, I had another issue because my battery is not working very well on my Dell computer. So I brought it to him. Any other technician basically would have taken the money out of my pocket, double charged me. And he's like, have you checked to see if this thing's under warranty? And I'm like, no, I haven't. And so I went back, checked if the thing's under warranty, and now I'm getting a free battery sent to me. And that's because, again, he's honest. He's only going to fix what he thinks he needs to fix and nothing more. And he's going to charge you the right price for it. He does smartphone and tablet repair. He does game console repair. He does smart home and surveillance camera installation, website design, all of that stuff. So check out his website. Here's what it is. It's ipcreboot.com. That's ipcreboot.com. Again, 8970 Taft Street in Pines. Phone number is 954-442-1000. 0-2. And when you call Barrington, talk a little Miami sports with him. He's a big Miami sports fan. And it's not just them either. You mentioned the two big schools. They're the third best team in the state right now because UCF lost its coach and continues to roll on. I know we can talk about schedule, but to me, it's just, and we did a whole episode on this. It's just amazing to me where they are as compared to where Miami is. So I think that's a good one for number 2. I think, look, the Canes situation this year, that is the biggest disappointment. I mean, we can talk about, the Dolphins are 7-6. I mean, for all my criticisms of Adam Gase and their offense, they're 7-6. Like I bet them over at 6.5. I don't know why. I got to get BetDSI to pay me, but they're over. It's already. And the Heat are kind of what I thought the Heat would be, pretty much, and sort of in between, trying to figure out what direction they're going. The Canes are the team, and the Panthers. I think we all sort of had high hopes, as Fisher was talking about earlier, that like maybe this was the year, but I think we all know better, like the way that they start. But the Canes, like this was supposed to be a 10-win team this year. And fancying it up with a couple wins at the end and going to play in the Pinstripe Bowl against Wisconsin, like I don't know that has a big effect on what we thought before the season, where the bottom totally fell out of it. I mean, Pittsburgh should never be representing the Coastal, okay, in the ACC championship game. That should not be happening. UCF should not be better than Miami. All right. These are just not things that should be happening. So I agree with you. I'm going to go with number 2. And I think this is probably going to surprise you guys a little bit that I don't have this first. But I've got Dwyane Wade's return to the Heat and deciding not to retire as 2. And the reason is I think there's a bigger picture thing at 1. But in terms of Wade, look, it's a tremendous story. I think it's remarkable how he's playing this year because we've talked about this on other pods. I mean, he's basically playing at his 2015-16 level where, he was counted on a lot more than he was supposed to be counted on this year. If you look on a per minute basis, he's been good. Okay. It's not has he not been embarrassing? He's been good. And he's been good after not knowing whether he's going to play all off season and saying he was 90% against playing. So I didn't know what kind of shape he'd be in physically, mentally, all the rest of it. And he's really been good. He's obviously given them a shot in the arm that they needed in terms of marketing and everything else. I think we saw the other day with the LeBron thing what this farewell tour will be like on the best days. I mean, there are some days it's a little silly, okay? But on the best days, when he goes to New York for the last time, when he goes to Chicago for the last time, those two are on the same road trip, by the way, in January. When he goes to Dallas for the last time, there's a history there. When he goes to Milwaukee for the last time, since he played collegiately there, I think there's some fun stuff when he goes to Boston for the last time. So I think it's been great that he came back. I think it's bought the Heat a little bit of time to kind of figure out what they want to do. I just don't have it number 1 because I think there's a bigger picture thing. But the other thing I want to mention along with Wade is it's not just Wade. Frank Gore has been remarkable this season. PFF, Pro Football Focus, had him yesterday. He's their 4th ranked back in the entire league this year at his age. I mean, that's a terrific story. Roberto Luongo at 39. Look what happened when Roberto was out. Okay. I mean, seriously, like, Cameron Wake, who I know doesn't have the sack numbers, but also is one of the highest ranked defensive ends in the league by anybody who's watched the film, like PFF, etc. Danny Amendola has given them really good play for the Dolphins this year, and he's stayed relatively healthy. The old guys in this market have been better than sort of there are a few young guys I like, but better than the mid-career guys. There's a lot of average mid-career guys in this market, and there's a few old guys who do things right on the field, off the field, the way that they prepare. So I've got all of that together. Wade, Wake, Amendola, Gore, Luongo. That's my number 2.
That's rather interesting because when you look at Dwyane Wade, a lot of us wondered going into the season how that was going to play out. I mean, 36 years old, like you said, Ethan, we didn't know what kind of shape he was going to come in with, but nobody in South Florida wanted him to go out without being able to put up the type of points that he's able to do. Not regularly, but intermittently. And it's amazing that he can dip into those old type of D-Wade kind of days, the flash kind of plays that we see from him, being more of an assist guy now. But nobody wanted him to go out only averaging maybe 3-4 points a game in limited minutes. He's still proving that he's tapped into the fountain of youth and still has it. And I think that's special for Heat fans, especially, heading out to the AAA or whether it's the Staples Center to see him play one last time.
Yeah, and here's the one other thing about that. Carmelo Anthony can't get a job right now. I mean, that's his contemporary, right? That was the guy drafted second overall in that draft. I mean, Bosch's circumstances, that's not his fault. But just think about that. Like, Carmelo Anthony is a broken, below average player that nobody in the league wants right now. And Dwyane Wade is the highest usage player on the Heat. Not saying that's a great thing.
It's so easy for this to be sad, right? It's so easy for endings to see, broken bodies and nobody wants you and you're corrosive. Like, for Dwyane Wade to, last year, I don't even think he made an on-court impact in the regular season. Obviously in the playoff game, and Chris, you mentioned it with the game 2 he had in Philly. But I don't think his on-court impact has really been that great. But you look at, for example, since he's come back from paternity leave, on the floor, they've been 9.3 points per 100 possessions with him on the floor. And that has not always been the case since he's come back with the Heat. So I do find that with Dwyane Wade, the fact that it's in a positive way both on and off the floor, and frankly, this is going to sound weird to include in the conversation about him, but the fact they're getting this for the minimum, like the Heat don't even have to pay for this, especially considering the lack of value that they have across their roster. One of the few things they've handled well for me in the last few years is Dwyane Wade's departure and then return, because you did have a sum of absence makes the heart grow fonder. He was okay with not starting, which I think is the right role for him. And you get him back on the cheap. And so I do think that this has worked out very well for the Heat. Obviously, you would have preferred for Dwyane Wade to have been a player for the Heat for the rest of the entirety of his NBA career, because I think Dirk Nowitzki is a very special place in Dallas sports because he's been there the entire time. But it's like 5% different. And I feel like you get all the positives out of Dwyane Wade and none of the negatives. It really is incredible.
It's incredible. And the one other thing you mentioned, the off the court, and we shouldn't let this pass. The fact that Dwyane Wade was here in this market during the Parkland tragedy is really huge, and maybe even making me really reconsider whether I should have put this first, because there is no other athlete in this market who could have had that kind of impact by just walking into a school. There's no one. Okay. What happened that day, just him showing up on the same day that Betsy DeVos was there, right? The education secretary didn't answer any questions, and the students were angry about it and posting stuff. And Dwyane showed up and the whole place was happy for a moment, okay, as long as he was there. That impact that he has, there's just no one else in South Florida who can be like that at all, or even close at this stage. And Luongo did a lot for them also. So again, it's been the older guys kind of in the market, but Dwayne's impact in that regard is really second to none. But he is second to something on mine. So I'm going to go to you guys. I'm assuming, because neither of you got to it, although I know Fisher got to it a little bit in terms of one game. So what is number one for you, Fisher?
Well, it segues perfectly on what we were just talking about. Dwyane Wade being traded back to Miami. Just the reception he got against the Milwaukee Bucks in that game, coming onto the court. The fact that he just should never have left. The hatchet between him and Pat Riley was buried. It was great to see him back at the AAA, wearing a Heat uniform, the reception that he got. It dipped into those championship years, a little bit of nostalgia there for all the fans, and obviously the greatest player to ever wear the uniform. It's just a very special moment. Even with Game 2 of the playoffs last year, it meant a lot for Heat fans to be able to see their hero come back and put on the uniform once again.
Yeah, and that's my number one as well. I just kind of put it all in one bucket. Traded back to Miami, winning Game 2 of the playoff of the playoff series against Philly, and then announcing he's going to come back and retire here at the end of the year. As much as you're saying that obviously he never should have left, I really do think that him leaving for a year, going to play in Cleveland, play with LeBron when that's kind of like the ultimate place you don't want him to go. For him to come back, like, I do think that there is an element of a player coming back and a player, leaving, and you sort of miss him. And I really do think that the Heat fans, I don't want to say we're taking Dwyane Wade for granted, but I think if he had stayed over a period of 2 years in which the Heat had a roughly similar amount of success, there's a certain amount of it winding down. It's not special every time he gets introduced into the game. It's just sort of he's playing games, and then he would have decided ahead of this year that this was his last one, and that would have been that. But I really really do think him coming back, the fact that every time he comes into the game, he gets an ovation, that for me can only happen if he goes somewhere else. And so I do think that the element of it being a return is what makes this special. I probably, like, in a different scenario in which he stayed with the Heat and then said, this is going to be my last year, it's still probably story number one because, as you said, Chris, he's probably, the greatest ever player in the history of the franchise. But I do think that him coming back and that whole element and then selling out a bunch of jerseys and all that stuff, I think that adds to the element of it being huge and it still feeling like every night, you're watching Dwyane Wade's return and you're watching Dwyane Wade's final year.
All right, I'm going to go to
number one. The old adage.
Go ahead,
real quick, it just speaks to the old adage, absence makes the heart grow fonder, and I truly believe you're right on with that.
I want to tell you about another great event we're having for the 5 Reasons Sports Network. And to me, this is our coolest event yet because this is the one that you can involve your kids in. You're not just watching the game, you're also watching them play. It's going to be at Gecko Parks in Weston. That's 3305 Corporate Avenue in Weston. This is a brand new facility. I've been there a bunch of times. My daughter loves to go. I feel like she's at a birthday party there every week because when parents come and see the place, they're like, yeah, this is the place we're going to have a birthday party. They've got trampolines. They've got dodgeball. They've got basketball. They've got games. They've got ropes course. They've got virtual reality now too. They've got great pizza and wings. And also they have rock climbing. And here's the deal. If you show up anytime between 12 and 4, this is on Sunday, the 16th, this upcoming Sunday, show up and say 5 reasons, buy a day pass, and you will get free rock climbing against your child. This is a $20 value. You can challenge your child. Do whatever you want to do. It's going to be a great time. So we'll have all the games on, Sunday ticket, Dolphins, Vikings, Gecko Parks in Weston. All right, let me go to my number 1 here, and this is going to be a bit of a downer note, but because I probably should have closed with Wade as number 1, but I went into this with this, and it's just a total context of South Florida sports. To me, the number 1 sports story in South Florida this year is mediocrity. It's just the general mediocrity of this market, which has not really occurred before. Now, we've had times where some teams have been bad, okay? I mean, obviously, you have a team like the Panthers where everybody still talks about 1996, okay? They've been bad for a long time. The Marlins have only made the playoffs twice. We know both times because they won the World Series, but you're going back to 1997 and 2003. Those have not been good franchises. The Hurricanes went through a real lull. The Heat, not so much, right? But there was 2007, 2008. There was 2000, sort of that 2001 to 2003 period. So there have been a couple of periods, not very many under Riley. And then obviously the Dolphins, we know. I mean, no playoff wins since 2000. But I don't think there's ever been a time where everybody is kind of stuck, okay? And where you have to actually look at, okay, are the Panthers getting it right and can they actually move forward? Or is the Marlins way to rebuild the right way to go to totally strip it down? But there just doesn't seem to be a ton of hope for anybody over the next couple of years. And that's why the Hurricanes thing was such a downer. And to put a face on this, there are 2 faces you can put on mediocrity in South Florida right now. One is not surprising, and that's a guy we haven't talked about at all on this, which is Ryan Tannehill, which is always a big story in South Florida. We didn't really put him in the top 5. I mean, Fisher picked a moment for the Dolphins where Osweiler played. So, we haven't really touched on Tannehill much, but he's kind of, to me, been the face of mediocrity in this market. Like, he's okay, but not good enough. And I know he's been better lately, and the Tanna stands are going to jump all over me. And again, I've said he's fine under the right circumstances. But to me, he's been the face of this is not a market to pay attention to nationally, right? Because nobody pays attention to Ryan Tannehill. Nobody pays attention to any other athletes here unless it's Dwyane Wade. And again, he's ours, okay? But in the context of the greater scheme of things, he's not Kobe nationally, etc. But to me, the face of mediocrity in this market has become the least likely face, and that's Pat Riley. And so to me, the number 1 story in this town for the past year is that the one beacon of strength in this market, the one person you could not challenge for decision making, because even if he made bad decisions, there was a vision that you believed in. I talked about the loss of confidence in Richt. There's been a loss of confidence in Riley. And I never thought that would happen, particularly after 2010. I never thought he and that organization, which is the best organization in this market by far, it has the best people at the top, it's the best run, it's the most streamlined, it's the most forward-thinking, that organization would put itself in a position where they don't know what to do next. And that's where they are. And they've hamstrung themselves. They've taken themselves out of the room with premium free agents because they have not been in position because they signed guys to contracts that the old Pat Riley never would have signed them to anything close. And they got away from their entire philosophy. So to me, the number one story in this market is Pat Riley took himself out of the room. And that plays into the Jimmy Butler situation, which became harder because you had to try to dump pieces that you didn't really want anymore. All of the things that they've done, not being able to be a real player for Kawhi Leonard, which they would have been in past years, all of that plays into it. So I like some of what the Heat are doing over the past week, playing the young guys, seeming to pick some kind of a direction, but they shouldn't be in a position where we're like cheering on a 2-1 road trip. Like that's not the Heat. That's the Dolphins. Okay. And the Heat becoming the Dolphins this year to me is the number one story in South Florida.
It's very well put. I think that it's been shocking to see what's happened. I mean, it's not shocking to see, what's happened with the Dolphins and what's happened with the Hurricanes, because frankly, their last 15 years have suggested that's who they are, frankly, as programs. But the Marlins are worse than mediocre. They're bad. But I will say, though, at least the Marlins show signs of, yes, they're going to, destroy the whole thing. And it's pretty easy to destroy and a lot harder to build it back up. But it's a strategy that's worked in baseball, and it's a strategy that could work for the Marlins. But I do think that Pat Riley, losing approval rating, I didn't think, I thought Pat Riley sustained his approval rating in a clash with the biggest player in the history of the franchise, that people were defending, including myself, were defending the decision to let him go and defending the decision to not pay him that amount of money. I think the degree to which that he sustained approval rating through his entire time here, even when they, had the number 2 pick in the draft, when they went 25-57, when they've had some down periods, Pat Riley still always had top approval rating. I don't want to say quit in the middle of the season, but he quit in the middle of a season to let Ron Rothstein coach out a 15-win team. It hasn't always been great for him, and yet he always had 100% approval rating. That's gone down, and as you said, you don't know where the next place to turn to is. You don't know what the next thing that's going to lift them out of this is.
I have a problem with just the fact that they've dug their heels in, and they're looking to win with this roster, knowing that, hey, that 30-11 team that finished 2 years ago, he's like, well, this is my best option because I missed out on Gordon Hayward. I missed out on Kawhi Leonard. No, the big names, the alpha dogs, no longer want to come to Miami, and that's very surprising considering how much they go out and party after the games here, going to live and whatever. But just the fact that they want to win with this team, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. They're playing for a 6th, 7th seed the last couple of years. I don't believe that this is the way to sustain things, and I think it leads me to what I was writing for the 2019 headlines, actually, that Pat Riley will retire. I think he's just tired of being a mediocre team. If he can't contend for a championship, it's another person's turn to take the wheel and to try to lead them back to the promised land, because it's just not getting done right now with Pat at the helm anymore. And that's unfortunate considering the greatness he's had for decades now, whether it was in Miami or with the Lakers.
All right, so let's get to some honorable mentions here, and then we can do a couple predictions for next year. One honorable mention that I had, we didn't really mention at all, was because there's been such mediocrity in this town that everybody seems to care about colors and logos all of a sudden. It's like, I mean, the biggest sports stories over the past couple of months have been the Vice jerseys and the Marlins colors and the Dolphins throwbacks and fields. That's until the shock at the Rock.
I have to do this. Inter Miami having colors in the name.
Yes, of course. Inter Miami having colors too. I mean, everybody all of a sudden is a designer. Like everybody's Adam Smoot from our network.
People are invading his corner. Get off Smoot's corner, everyone.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, that's what he does. So to me, it's just amazing. It just shows you, like, people are, they always say, people, you want them to be attracted to sort of the uniform, the player in the uniform, not the uniform. No, Miami sports fans like the uniforms now. That's it. The players themselves, they don't know anything about, but they, they love the colors in the uniform. So that was one of mine that did not make the list. Any for you guys that we did not mention?
So I've actually got quite a lengthy list here. First, Jarvis Landry and Ndamukong Suh and Mike Pouncey all being let go in one offseason. That the Dolphins kind of remade their roster in a personality kind of way. That they also didn't like to have those characters in the locker room. And Jarvis Landry got his big contract somewhere else. And I think the Dolphins have kind of carried on at the very least the same. You can certainly say by record that they've carried on the same. And there's a couple of anthem stories this year. First off, Stephen Ross saying they will stand and then the NFL leaving them out to dry as the first team to enforce that the anthem is conduct detrimental, and then they're saying, no, never mind. And then the Dolphins had like a 3-day period in which they were the face of, being against the anthem. They had a couple of those this year. One, the lightning delay, the 2 lightning delays in the season opener was kind of an oddity. I had the Heat do nothing in an offseason as one, like, again, you mentioned the fact that Pat Riley's in charge of this team. They literally did nothing in an entire offseason. They extended Wayne Ellington. They brought back Dwyane Wade, and that was it. Like, they did absolutely nothing in the entirety of an offseason. One that I had totally forgotten about was Hassan Whiteside. Remember, he basically almost ran his way out of town, both with his playoff performance and with post-game comments he made in a game in March in which he said, a lot of teams don't have a good center. They're going to use their strengths. It's really and there are a lot of teams that can use a center, and he went off on his role, and someone followed up by saying, is this you questioning your position with the Heat? And he said, maybe, I don't know. That public stir almost basically ran him out of town. The fact that he's still here is kind of insane. The Jimmy Butler trade talks, you both have mentioned the Stoneman Douglas tragedy and the South Florida Sports World reaction to it. You mentioned Dwyane Wade. The Panthers did a brilliant job. I thought everyone did a really good job in terms of honoring that tragedy and sort of keeping them the proper perspective. I had the Panthers playoff push falling apart. UM basketball being on the wrong end of a March Madness buzzer beater, that they were in the one shining moment in the wrong way. I don't feel like that's really happened in the course of South Florida sports history. The report that came out, Stephen Ross wanted them to trade down rather than draft Minkah Fitzpatrick. Ownership meddling, I think, was a story with both that story and David Sampson chronicling all the ways in which Jeffrey Loria intervened with running of the Marlins. This is from a personal point of view. La Liga announced a regular season match was going to be played in Miami that featured Barcelona that has since been canceled because the regulatory agencies couldn't work that out. A La Liga match being played in Miami would have been huge. And then my last one is just sort of an in memoriam. Tony Sperano, Wayne Huizinga, and Rasul Butler all passing away in the last year.
Wow, all three, but particularly those first two, which kind of. I mean, in Wayne's case, not as much a shot in the dark, but in Tony's, I mean, that one came out of nowhere. Fisher, since he's named everything down to Miami FC at this point, and American Heritage losing Patrick Surtain, do you have anything that Chris missed?
I'll go with 2 feel-good stories for you this year. Let's start with the Marlins, okay, because they didn't get a lot of love this year. Isaac Galloway, 11 seasons in the minor leagues. He came up with a pinch hit double walk-off game winner against the Reds at one point. Just the season that he had. For the Marlins to try to make this youth movement move on, to bring in a veteran minor leaguer into the clubhouse, I thought he was a very good feel-good story this year. And then the off-the-field work that Kenny Stills has been doing. Yes. We know he's up for the Walter Payton Man of the Year award, and we know that he is friends with Colin Kaepernick. And it's really going to be interesting to me to see how that develops, who votes on Stills, because he's definitely deserving, whether it's bringing communities together with police officers, providing great Christmases and Thanksgivings for families who could not afford that. I think Stills has just been a beacon of hope in our community, and I think he's definitely deserving of the Walter Payton Man of the Year award. But his affiliation with Colin Kaepernick could be interesting, and we know he takes a knee during the national anthem to stand up for social injustice. So I think he just does a bunch of great work in South Florida. We're very lucky and fortunate to have him here. But I do want to go back to one point real quick, guys. Could you imagine this transpiring into 2019, potentially 2020? Manny Diaz takes the Temple job. Say that goes down this year. And Willie Taggart is out of a job next year. He's off to another slow start at Florida State. Manny Diaz at Florida State, and then Mark Richt gets canned at Miami. That would just be an ugly embarrassment.
Oh, my God.
Oh, boy.
Oh, my God.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy.
I'm sweating. This is
bad. That's bad.
This could be really bad.
We should have ended with your feel good story. Hey, Roddy McGruder's been a great story this year. So is Nick O'Leary.
There you go.
Can we go with those? Those are really positive stories. I'm on the prediction front. That's a good. Well, I don't know if it's a good one. It's kind of a scary one. On the prediction front, going to go with a couple of different things here. Your prediction on Riley to me is not totally out of whack. It's just, again, being around there for more than 20 years. I mean, if you're in a maze and you can't find your way out at a certain point, then you've got to look for sort of a graceful exit anywhere you can, even if it's someone helicoptering you out, right? And so, Pat always told me, I said, when would it be over for you? And he says, I want to win one championship, and then I'm going to Paris. There's not even going to be a post-game press conference. Chris, his wife, we're going to get on a plane. You're never going to find me again, okay? That was the dream ending, right? Like, that's what he wanted with his generational team. That's not going to happen, right? I think that's clear. They're just too boxed in at this stage, and I don't think Fisher, it's that nobody wants to play in Miami. They can't. Like Brian Windhorst has said, like that's what other GMs don't understand, because the Heat still remain an incredibly attractive destination. I mean, Jimmy Butler wanted to be here, like even though they didn't know they could get a second star. Gordon Hayward almost picked Miami, even though his college coach was in Boston. I think players want to play here. I just don't think they've created the circumstances the way they created circumstances in 2000, the way they created circumstances in 2010. They've put themselves in a box. It's mostly Riley. It was somewhat Arison with the Tyler Johnson contract. But I would not be surprised. I've told guys who cover that team, don't be stunned, okay? Don't be stunned, Fisher, if at 9:30 in the morning at some point you're going to get a press release from the Miami Heat saying, be at American Airlines Arena. Don't release this to the public. Be at American Airlines Arena at 11 o'clock in the interview room. I think we're headed there at some point. I remember when it happened when he passed the reins to Stan. I remember when it happened when he passed the reins to Spo. He just wakes up one morning and gets his coffee from Dunkin' Donuts, if he still does that, and is just like, it's just not for me anymore. And he's done it a couple of times. I can see him, them moving him into a consulting capacity a la Jerry West. And to me, what'll be the most interesting thing when that happens is who wins. I'm not calling it a power struggle inside the organization. I don't know this. But who wins the philosophical debate inside that organization? Is the lead guy going to be Shane Battier, who obviously comes with the Arison's endorsement? Is the lead guy going to be Eric Spoelstra? Is it going to be a combination of Spoelstra and Andy Ellisberg and Adam Simon? That's going to be fascinating. But if I was to say, what do I think the major event in South Florida sports is going to be in 2019? I think it's going to be Pat Riley moving into a consulting capacity. That would be my prediction.
That would be my number one as well.
Okay. Actually, you know what? No. Go ahead, Chris, and sort of round off your full, because you seem like you had a few of these. So 2019 headlines from you, Chris.
Well, number one, Dwyane Wade plays final game north of the border. I haven't making the playoffs. Number two, Dolphins draft a quarterback in the first round for the first time since Dan Marino selecting
West Virginia's Will Greer. Not happening, Fisher. Never happening. They're never drafting a quarterback again. Say that every year. Ryan Tannehill's farewell tour is 2028. By the way, get your tickets now. Never happened.
And the Marlins announced Jorge Posada as the new manager, replacing Don Mattingly, who's in the final year of his contract, Andy Pettit as pitching coach, Mariano Rivera as chief international scout, and Bernie Williams, master of ceremonies.
Bernie bringing the guitar? He's bringing the guitar. I like that. That's a good one. All right, Whittingham, you got any others?
Yeah. I've got three. One, Ryan Tannehill will be back and starting at quarterback for the Dolphins in 2019. Two, the Heat will acquire a superstar in 2019 in some capacity, whether it's via trade or via free agency, although free agency seems unlikely. I do think they will get that done and acquire a superstar. And because I'm a soccer dork, I have to include this. Inter Miami will make world headlines by announcing their first player in 2019. The roster build starts next year, and I think they're gonna bring in a big world superstar to be that first player.
All right, and I'll go with this. One, justice will be better because we have to. We're contractually obligated by Miami Heat to say that. Hassan Whiteside will not start a game for the Miami Heat in the calendar year 2019.
Wow,
that's my prediction. I think they've hit a point of no return with that one. The Dolphins, I believe, will draft a quarterback. Not in the first round, though. That's not happening. I believe they will draft a quarterback in the fourth round or later. They will sign Teddy Bridgewater, and Ryan Tannehill will win the competition in camp. That's my prediction for the Dolphins. The Panthers will have games in hand. That's my prediction for March and April, that we will be talking about the Panthers having games in hand. And I do think that the Richt Revolt, as I'm starting to call it a little bit down in South Florida, will occur. One other prediction, and we will close on this. 5 Reasons Sports will have a website. Made an announcement on that today. We will have a website. You will find all of our podcasts in one place. And by the end of the year, we'll be the dominant sports force in South Florida, other than NBC6. Okay, so
there you go.
Thanks, but ahead of the Herald. Thanks to Chris Fischer for joining us. We really appreciate it. Again, you can find him at Fischer NBC6, FISCHER NBC6, or find him Sundays on Sports Final. Sometimes Whittingham appears there as well, so don't let that discourage you. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Fire Arena podcast. Thank you so much.